So while the president isn't saying a whole lot about the avalanche of new COVID cases ravaging the nation he's supposed to be protecting, there's one person whose diagnosis he did see fit to mention, that of Rudy Giuliani, who, to paraphrase Trump, is rounding the corner right into the Georgetown Medical Center. But it's unclear exactly why or even whether he's been showing symptoms. It was, in fact, Trump who broke the news of Giuliani's diagnosis, announcing yesterday on Twitter, of course, that he, quote, has tested positive for the China virus, going on to say, "Get better soon, Rudy. We will carry on." Because always better to blame China than Giuliani's maskless interactions with more people than probably even he could count in recent days. Of course, one might wonder why this one man is so much more important to the president than the nearly 200,000 others being diagnosed with COVID every single day. Perhaps it's because this is the man who's been leading the seemingly aimless charge in Trump's legal, and I use the term loosely, efforts to overturn the election. You know, the ones that keep getting thrown out of court after court, including in Michigan, where the Secretary of State says armed protesters have been gathering outside her home. And Georgia, where George W. Bush appointed Judge Timothy Batten, reportedly declared today, quote, "They want this court to substitute its judgment for that of 2.5 million Georgia voters who voted for Joe Biden, and this I am unwilling to do." Again, that's the same Georgia where the GOP is looking to hang on to 2 Senate seats in upcoming runoff elections, elections they really need Republicans to vote in. And yet when the president came to town this weekend, supposedly to whip up support for the duo, this was part of his message.
They cheated and they rigged our presidential election, but we will still win it. We will still win it. We'll still win it. And they're going to try and rig this election, too.
Some of his supporters have gone even further, straight out telling Republicans not to bother voting.
Why would you go back and vote in another rigged election? For God's sakes, fix it. You got to fix it before we'll do it again.
I don't know, but seems like an unproductive strategy to me, and one that's not sitting well with a lot of establishment Republicans, but not so much so that they're actually willing to stand up against the president. As a Washington Post survey late last week found, just 27 of 249 Republicans in Congress are willing to acknowledge that Joe Biden won the election. 27 of 249. I'm joined now by Heather Cox Richardson, professor of history at Boston College, who's devoted much of her studies to the Republican Party's evolution. She's also out with a terrific new book, How the South Won the Civil War, Oligarchy, Democracy, and the Continuing Fight for the Soul of America, which was recently named one of the Washington Post's 50 notable works of nonfiction in 2020. Heather, it's good to see you, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure, Jim.
So the latest conventional wisdom is the vast majority of Republicans in Congress are silent for fear that they will scare off Trump voters in their districts. In your latest, or one of your latest, Letter from an American, your newsletter, terrific newsletter, you seem to buy into that reasoning. Is that really all there is?
Well, all is not the way I'd put it. I think that they are very concerned about losing Trump voters, the Republicans, because they desperately need them to continue to win. That being said, we are in an unprecedented moment when we have establishment leaders in a party refusing to acknowledge the results of a democratic election. That's a really big deal. And so what we're really seeing, I think, is the fight for the soul of the Republican Party to see whether or not it's going to become all Trump all the time, or whether, in fact, some establishment Republicans like Kitzinger out of the Midwest is going to go ahead and reclaim the party for some kind of set of principles as opposed to loyalty to a single man.
I want to get back to the party as a whole for a minute, but I want to stay on this notion that they have to support Trump for fear that they'll lose Trump voters. So if Trump announces, as some suggest he will, on Inauguration Day that he's running in 2024, or that he simply uses the $200 million he's grifted away from the American public, allegedly for his defense of his winning election, and uses that money to continue to keep his constituency in place, will these same legislators be saying in a year Donald Trump won the election, or Joe Biden is not the legitimate president?
I actually don't think that's what's going to happen, because I think you're going to have the issue of right now, Trump is taking a lot of oxygen because he is still the president of the United States. For all the fact he's not acting like one, he is one. Once that ceases to be the case, he's going to be, I hate to say it, a loser. And once he's a loser, he's not going to get the kind of attention that he is currently getting. So first of all, that's going to be taken off the table. He's also not a young man. And so when people talk about him running in 2024 or 2028, time has a limit on all of us. So I think we have to remember he's not some force that's always going to be there. But the bigger question for the Republican Party is, are they, in fact, going to embrace this idea that the only thing that they have in common with their voters is a sense of victimization, a sense of hatred toward the majority in America that they feel is stealing the future from them? Or are they, in fact, going to try to come up with a set of policies that can command a majority of the American people? And right now, the Republican Party doesn't have that, because it has doubled down so on the idea of voter suppression and gerrymandering and all the things that tend to drive a party to the far extremes. And, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Some people are saying that Trump is going to burn the Republican Party to the ground. Other people say that his supporters will hive off and become their own sort of third rail, if you will, and the Republican Party will return to a center-right party. It's not entirely clear to me which is going to happen, but I will tell you, the fact that they are refusing to acknowledge a democratically elected leader is a huge stain on the party. I've been a big supporter of the idea of them rebuilding. This is a biggie. This is a big one to get over.
The reason I've been smiling through your answer here was not because of what you just said, but when you said a minute ago, he's not a young man. In 4 years, were he to run again, he'd be a year younger than Joe Biden is today, 40-some days away from inauguration. So the world has changed, at least the world of chronology. It sounds, you've said it several times, it sounds like you're almost channeling former Speaker John Boehner, or Boehner is channeling you. Here's Boehner 2 years ago, John Boehner.
There is no Republican Party. There's a Trump Party. The Republican Party is kind of taking a nap somewhere.
So how about answering your own question? And is this a nap, or is this like a permanent resting place for the pre-Trumpian Republican Party, Heather?
That's real rich coming from Boehner, by the way, who, of course, stopped legislation that he didn't want to see go through except by Republican votes, including immigration legislation, a bipartisan bill that he killed dead on the floor of the House. Well, first of all, I'm a prophet of the past, not of the future, so I can't tell you what's going to happen. I will tell you that right now the Republican Party is corrupt to the core. Now, that being said, the principles of the Republican Party, the ones that they formed back in the 1850s, the idea that the country worked best when you put faith in the common man and you use the government to support the ability of people at the bottom to go ahead and have equal access to resources and equality before the law, is still absolutely baked into our DNA. So the question is it going to be the apparatus of the old Republican Party that right now is in a struggle with the Trump people to control it, whether that will be reclaimed by the establishment Republicans, or whether the Republican ideology is going to have to be reborn in a different party in a different form? I don't think it's going to ever go away. I think it's been one of the major ideologies that's been with us since the 1850s.
So you said a minute ago you're about history, you're not about predicting the future. So let's talk history for a minute, if we can. How the South won the Civil War. You trace the essence of the Confederacy: white supremacy, subjugation of people of color, from the South to the move west, to Goldwater, to Reagan, and then ultimately to Trump, the common thread being that equality for people of color and women is antithetical, they argue, to the interests of white men. So could you trace those 155 years in 55 seconds for us?
In haiku? So the book argues, in fact, that one of the things that's baked into our early years is the idea that equality for white men depends on inequality for people of color and women, and that a corollary to that that is deployed usually by oligarchs is to say that any time that women and people of color get to have equality before the law, that somehow that is going to destroy equality for white men. And what the point point of the book was to say that this is a rhetorical device. It is not reality. And that one of the key escapes that I hope that we finally reached in the 21st century is to say we do not have to be bound by our past. We have the ability, once we recognize that, in fact, a multicultural democracy is possible, to go ahead and make it real.
So is that what breaks the string? Our self-education, or is it, as a friend of mine calls it, the actuarial solution, meaning white men just die out at some point as a majority, and then ultimately it becomes a non-issue? I'm serious about that, by the way. What does break the string?
Well, I'm smiling because that's what my 28-year-old son says to me, too. But what I think makes the difference is two things. One is that beginning in 1980 with Reagan's election, women began to vote differently than their husbands did. So we have a huge gender gap now that we didn't have before. And right at this moment, although of course it's been under contest since the 2020 election, we have the ability of minorities actually to vote, which they couldn't in the 1860s and the 1870s. And so we do have the ability now really to hammer out a new kind of multicultural democracy, like I say, that does not denigrate white men, but that includes them equally before the law as it does all American citizens. And that, I think that we have the ability to walk forward into a new future that puts behind this, what I call American paradox and its corollary.
Well, in light of the fact that we almost never end an interview on a positive note on the show, we're going to stop right there. Is that okay with you, Heather?
The reason the book ends that way is my editor said the same thing. I need something positive, Heather, and I gave it to her.
Well, you just gave it to us, too. Heather, it's great to see you. Thanks so much, and congratulations on the book.
Thanks.
Once again, Heather's book is How the South Won the Civil War, Oligarchy, Democracy, and the Continuing Fight for the Soul of America.